Close your eyes, let your body settle, let your hands rest open and still. You have been with this story for a long time now. You have heard the bell. You have heard the court in its beauty and its overreach. You have heard the battles, the cliff, the storm, the strait, and the sea receiving what the sea received. Now, the quiet. The third part of the Heike is the quietest part, not because nothing happens, things happen, but because the things that happen slowly, in the mountain valley, in the small hermitage, in the prayers of the woman who survived what she did not expect to survive, and found herself in the silence that came after everything. The Kenreimon-in, Tokuko, the daughter of Kiyomori, the mother of the drowned emperor, the woman who went into the sea at Dan no Ura and was pulled back out, is the center of the third part. Her life, her memory, her prayer, and the particular grace of the story that gives her the last word. Rest now, and listen. After Dan no Ura, the Kenreimon-in was brought back to Kyoto, not as the Kenreimon-in, not as the Lady of the Gate of Health, the mother of the emperor, the highest-ranking woman in Japan, but as a prisoner, as the surviving daughter of the family that had been destroyed. The city she returned to was the city she had left more than 2 years before, but different. The mansions of the Taira were gone, the Rokuhara burned, the other compounds taken or fallen, and the city that remained was a city already becoming what it would be in the new order, the formal seat of the emperor, the ceremonial center of Japan, the place where the ancient forms were maintained, while the real power operated elsewhere. She was placed in a small house on the edge of the city. She had nothing, not the silk robes. Those were gone, traded, or lost in the years of the flight. Not the household, the dozens of women who had attended her in the Heian court. Most of them were dead or scattered, or living their own diminished afterlives in the changed world. Not the child. The child was in the sea. What she had, the prayer, the particular practice of the Buddhist devotee, the recitation of the Nembutsu, the name of Amida Buddha, repeated in the faith that repetition builds the channel through which the compassion of the Buddha reaches the person who calls, Namu Amida Butsu. I take refuge in Amida Buddha. She said it, again and again, for the rest of her life. She became a nun. In the 5th month of 1185, within weeks of Dan no Ura, she took the vows, cut her hair, put on the black robes of the Buddhist renunciate. This was not unusual. The path from the world to the hermitage, from the life of the court to the life of the temple, was a path that women of high rank in the Heian period took regularly. Gyo had taken it. Many others had taken it. The world offered them a position that depended entirely on the continued goodwill of the powerful, a position that could be withdrawn at any moment, that had no security beyond the beauty and the skill that had earned it, and the temple offered them a different kind of security, the security of the vow, the unchanging requirements of the religious life, the protection of the institution rather than the protection of an individual. For the Kenreimon-in, the choice was even simpler. There was nothing left to hold her in the world. The family was gone. The court was someone else's. The child was in the sea. The vow was the form available to her, the shape that the tradition provided for the life of someone who had lost everything and needed a container for what remained. She cut her hair, the long hair, the hair that was one of the markers of aristocratic beauty in the Heian world. that had been arranged and dressed and cared for since she was a girl was cut. This is what the cutting means. The world I was in is behind me. The person I was in that world is behind me. What is ahead of me is different. Ohara, the mountain valley north of Kyoto, where the hills hold the cold air in the mornings, and the sound of water is always present, and the maples in autumn turn the slopes the color of fire, is where the Kenreimon-in went to live. Jakko-in, the small temple at the edge of the valley, ancient, even then, said to have been founded by the prince Shotoku in the 6th century, became her home. A small room, a simple altar, the image of the Buddha before which she prayed, the sound of the water below, the sound of the wind in the cedars above. The valley of Ohara had been, for centuries before her, a place associated with holy retreat, with the particular kind of life that removes itself from the world, not out of defeat, but out of the understanding that the world is one place, and the practice is another, and the practice is where she needed to be. The distance from Kyoto to Ohara is not great, a few hours on foot in the 12th century, but the distance is sufficient to be past the sound of the city, sufficient to be in the mountain air rather than the valley air of Kyoto, sufficient to make the journey something that required intention, that said, I am going somewhere with purpose, not drifting to the edge of things. She went there with purpose. She stayed. The life at Jakko-in was not the life of the court. This needs to be said simply, not as lament, not as complaint, but as the plain fact of what the change was. At court, the silk robes in the correct colors for the correct season, the ceremony at dawn, the ceremony at dusk, the meals prepared by servants, the gardens tended by gardeners, the music in the evening, the women who attended, who helped with the hair, who carried the messages, who were the texture of the daily life of the person at the center. At Jakko-in, the black robe, the prayer at dawn, the prayer at dusk, the simple food that the valley provided and the nearby farms donated, and the occasional visits of the people of Ohara who brought what they had. She learned to live without servants. She learned to do what she had never been asked to do, the ordinary maintenance of a life that the court had always done for her. And she prayed. This is the constant, the thing that the court life had not provided in this particular form, the sustained, deliberate, hourly practice of turning attention toward the Buddha and away from the accumulated weight of everything that had happened, not forgetting. The prayer was also for the memory, for the people who had died, for the child, for the family, but holding the memory in a different way, as the subject of the prayer rather than as the thing that overwhelmed the person praying. The seasons at Ohara, the valley that the Kenreimon-in chose for her remaining years, is a valley of seasons, of the particular Japanese seasons that the Heian aesthetic had spent 4 centuries finding the words for. Spring at Ohara, the plum first, in the cold of early spring, when the snow has not entirely left the upper slopes, the plum that blooms before it should, before the world is ready, in the particular courage of the thing that blooms into the cold. Then the cherry, in Ohara as everywhere, the brief, total, extravagant explosion of the pink and white that the Japanese have always known is not merely beautiful, but meaningful. Beautiful, because brief. Brief, because beautiful. Summer at Ohara, the deep green of the cedars, the water running cold from the mountain above, the fireflies in the evening, the particular silence of a mountain valley in summer when the city below is hot and the valley holds its own cooler air. Autumn at Ohara, the maples. This is what Ohara is famous for. The autumn color that draws people today from Kyoto and from further to walk the paths through the valley and see the maples turning red and orange against the darker green of the cedars. She saw this every year, for years and years, the maples turning. Winter at Ohara, snow. The valley fills with it, the paths become difficult, the water slows, and the hermitage at Jakko-in is enclosed in the particular quiet of a world under snow. The sound muffled, the light diffused, the edges of things softened into the white that the winter provides as its particular version of impermanence. The retired Emperor Go-Shirakawa came to Ohara, the old man, the impossible survivor, the political genius who had outlasted everything, made the journey north from Kyoto to the valley, where the woman who had been at the center of the world he had helped to destroy was living out her years. He came quietly. The tale says he came before dawn, before the world was fully awake, with a small group of attendants, not the full pomp of an imperial progress, but the subdued retinue of someone who wanted the visit to be real rather than ceremonial. He arrived at Jakko-in. The Kenreimon-in was not there. She had gone, the tale says, to pick flowers on the mountain, gathering the wildflowers of the mountain path as part of the Buddhist practice of offering flowers to the altar. Go-Shirakawa waited. He looked at the hermitage, at the small building, the rough-hewn gate, the garden that was not a garden in the Heian sense, but a mountain clearing with the particular wildness of things that grow where no one has decided they should grow. He wept. The tale does not say exactly what he felt, does not offer the internal account of what the old man experienced, looking at the evidence of what the world had become, but he wept, and then she came down from the mountain. She saw him from the path, the figure waiting at the gate of Jakko-in, the man she recognized even at distance, even after everything, and she stopped. The tale says she was overcome. She did not expect this, had not expected that the world she had left would come to find her, and the sight of Go-Shirakawa, the old retired emperor standing at the gate of her mountain hermitage in the early morning light. This was too much to manage simply. Her attendant, Awa no Naishi, one of the women who had survived and followed her into retirement, gently encouraged her. "You should meet him. He has come all this way. He has been waiting." She composed herself. She went to him. The meeting of these two people, the woman who had lost everything and the man who had survived everything, is one of the most quietly extraordinary moments in the Heike. They had been, in another life, on opposite sides of the conflicts that had defined their world. Her family had been his great opponents. His maneuverings had helped bring about the conditions in which the Taira fell. Now, a mountain valley, an early morning, two old people, or one old person and one young person, who had become old in ways that age alone doesn't produce, meeting in the quiet. Go-Shirakawa asked her to tell him her story, and the Kenreimon-in, who had more story than most people who had ever lived, who had been at the center of everything and survived to the edge of everything, told him. She told it in a particular way. The Buddhist cosmology of the period understood existence as organized into 6 realms, the Rokudo, the 6 paths of being, through which all beings cycle across their lives and deaths, the realm of the gods, the realm of fighting spirits, the realm of humans, the realm of animals, the realm of hungry ghosts, the realm of hell. She used this framework. She looked at her life, the life that had taken her from the height of the Heian court to the sea at Dan no Ura, to the mountain valley of Ohara, and she found in the Buddhist map of the 6 realms the shape of her own journey. The realm of the gods, the court of the Taira at its height, the silk and the ceremony, the garden and the music, the particular perfection of a world organized around beauty, the realm of fighting spirits, the war, the armies and the battles, the ships on the sea, the tide running through the strait, the realm of humans, what she was now, the ordinary person, stripped of the extraordinary, living the ordinary life of prayer and sleep and food, and the particular awareness of impermanence that the ordinary life, lived fully, provides. The realm of animals, the flight, the years of moving from place to place, driven by necessity, with no choice about where to go, at the mercy of the war and the decisions of others, the life reduced to the animal's fundamental, survival, movement, the search for safety. The realm of hungry ghosts, the exile, the years on the ships, wanting the things that could not be given, the home that was gone, the city that was held by others, the life that was over, the particular hunger of the person who desires what no longer exists, who reaches for what the world cannot provide. The realm of hell, the sea, Dan no Ura, the battle, the death of the child, the sword in the water, her own going under, and the hands that pulled her back, and the surfacing into the light of a world that contained all of this and required her to keep living in it. She had moved through all 6 realms in a single life, in the 30 years between her birth in the household of Kiyomori and this morning in the mountain valley. She had been in each of them, not as a metaphor, as her actual life. The Buddhist map of existence was not, for her, a theological abstraction. It was the account of her days. Go-Shirakawa listened. The old man, who had spent his life at the center of the political world, who had survived by maneuvering, by always finding the position that kept him viable, sat in the morning light of the mountain valley and listened to the woman tell him what it had been like to be at the center of the world he had helped to make. The Heike says he wept. This is the word the tale uses again and again in the scenes at Ohara. The weeping that the situation calls forth from everyone who encounters it. And Go-Shirakawa's weeping carries a specific weight. He had managed things. He had outmaneuvered the Taira. He had outlasted Yoshinaka. He had survived Yoritomo. He had survived everything. And here was the cost. Not his cost. He had paid remarkably little for someone at the center of so much destruction, but the cost as it had been borne by the people around him, the Kenreimon-in, who had been the daughter of the man who had been his greatest opponent, sitting in a mountain hermitage telling him about the sea. He asked her if there was anything he could do. She said, "Pray for the souls of the Taira, for the people who had died, for the child, for the family." This is what she wanted, not restoration, not the return of what was lost, not the reopening of the court to the daughter of the Heike, just the prayers. Go-Shirakawa left. He descended the mountain path back toward Kyoto, back toward the world of politics and management that was his element, and the Kenreimon-in returned to the hermitage and the prayer. The tale does not tell us what Go-Shirakawa thought on the way back. It does not give us his internal account of the visit, what he made of the valley, of the hermitage, of the woman who had been the Empress Mother of Japan, and was now living in the mountain cold with a rough gait and a simple altar, and a few faithful women who had chosen to stay beside her. But it tells us something through the quality of the scene itself, through the careful attention the narrative pays to the details of the visit, the hour of the journey, the smallness of the retinue, the weeping, the particular question and the particular answer. It tells us that Go-Shirakawa was moved, that the survivor, the man who had survived by not being moved, by seeing clearly and acting on what he saw without the sentimentality that would have been a liability, was moved. By what? By the evidence of the cost. By the woman in the mountain who was the cost, who embodied in her single life the full weight of what the world had done, and who had not collapsed under it, who had found the form available to her, and inhabited it fully, who was praying for the people who had died while Go-Shirakawa returned to the world that continued. She was not entirely alone. The women who had attended her at court, the ladies-in-waiting who had followed the Taira into exile, who had been on the ships during the years of the flight, some of them were gone, dead in the sea, scattered in the chaos, captured and dispersed, but some remained. Awa no Naishi, one of the women who had been at the Kenreimon-in side from the court through the exile and now in the hermitage, who had been the one to encourage her mistress to meet Go-Shirakawa, who had chosen the mountain valley over whatever life the changed world might have offered her. The loyalty of these women, the women who stayed, is one of the things the third part of the Heike returns to with particular care. Not the dramatic loyalty of the warrior at the gate, not Benkei's standing death, but the quiet loyalty of the person who shows up every day and continues to show up, who does not measure the service against the reward it offers, who simply stays because the person they are serving needs someone to stay. The court world of the Heike was built on these women, on their labor and their presence and their willingness to subordinate their own lives to the life of the person at the center. The third part honors them by naming them, by giving them the small dignity of being acknowledged in the story of the woman they served. Their names are in the tale. They are there. They chose to be there. The Pure Land. Jodo, the Pure Land of Amida Buddha, was the destination that the Buddhist practice at Jakko-in pointed toward. Not an abstract destination, not a theological concept held at intellectual distance, but the specific, vivid image of the place that the Pure Land tradition described, a realm of light, of the sound of water and of birds, of the presence of the Buddha, who received all who called on his name with sincere heart, the place that the grandmother had described to the child emperor as she stepped off the ship at Dan no Ura. Beneath the waves there is a magnificent capital. The Kenreimon-in practiced the Nembutsu, the recitation of Amida's name, with the 5 colored cords connected to the hand of the Buddha on the altar. The physical connection, the silk cord running from the image of the Buddha to the hand of the person praying, as if the connection could be made literal, as if the practice of holding the cord was the practice of being held. Namu Amida Butsu. The 6 syllables that contain the wish, the faith, the understanding that what the human being has and is insufficient for what the human being needs, and that insufficiency is not a failure, but simply the nature of the human being, which is why the compassion exists, to bridge the gap between what we are and what we need. She held the cord. She said the name. The third part of the Heike is about what comes after, not after the story, after the battles, after the fall, but after what the battles produce, the silence. Every war ends, the fighting stops, the armies return or dissolve. The surviving generals take their positions in the new order, or are eliminated by the new order. The landscape is reorganized around the new reality. And the people who lived through it, who are not generals, who do not reorganize landscapes, find themselves in the silence that comes after, and have to understand what to do with it. The Kenreimon-in in the mountain valley is the Heike's answer to this question, its most fully realized account of what the person who lived through everything does with the silence. She prays. She prays for the dead. She prays for herself. She prays for the world that was and is not. She prays in the silence because the silence is what is available, and the prayer is what she has. This is not a small thing. The Heike presents it as the thing of most importance, as the answer, not the consolation prize, as what the story has been building toward through all the battles and the beauty and the bell. The person in the mountain valley, holding the cord, saying the name, praying in the quiet that came after the noise. While the Kenreimon-in prayed in the mountain valley, the world was reorganizing itself. Yoritomo at Kamakura, building his bakufu, his warrior government, was making decisions that would shape Japan for the next 7 centuries. The administrative structures, the system of warriors holding land from the shogun, not from the emperor, not from the court, in exchange for military service. This is the feudal structure that the Kamakura period introduced into Japanese governance, and its influence persisted long after the Kamakura shogunate itself had been replaced by the Muromachi and then the Tokugawa. The appointment of Jito and Shugo, land stewards and military governors, in every province of Japan, this extended Yoritomo's reach beyond Kamakura and the eastern provinces he had originally controlled into the whole of the country. It was the administrative equivalent of the victory at Dan no Ura, not dramatic, not the subject of poems and no plays, but more durable than any battle. The court in Kyoto continued its ceremonies. The emperor continued to be the emperor. The rituals of the imperial institution were maintained with the particular care of people who understand that the ceremony is the institution, that if you stop performing the forms, the institution stops existing. But the power was in Kamakura. The ceremony was in Kyoto. The separation between these two, between the formal and the real, between the sacred and the effective, was the defining structure of Japanese governance for 700 years. What happened to the Taira who survived? Not all of them died at Dan no Ura. Some had escaped before the battle, had drifted away from the fleet in the weeks before the final engagement, reading the direction of what was coming and making the calculation that survival was more important than loyalty. Some were captured, some simply disappeared into the provinces, into the lives of ordinary people, taking new names, letting the connection to the destroyed clan fall away like something that could be shed. The legends of the Heike survivors are part of the folk culture of the regions where they are said to have gone. In the mountains of the Iya Valley in Shikoku, one of the most remote and difficult landscapes in Japan, there is a tradition that the descendants of the Taira settled there, fleeing the pursuit of the Minamoto, finding in the deep valley the particular protection of a place too difficult to be worth pursuing someone to. In the village of Heike no Sato, the village of the Heike, in the mountains of Nara Prefecture, a similar tradition persists. These traditions cannot be verified. They are the traces of the imagination, the way that local communities absorb a great national story into their own geography, finding in the landscape around them the evidence of what the story described. But they are also something more than invention. They carry the knowledge that people survive, that the families of the defeated do not simply vanish, that the human impulse to persist is stronger than the impulse of the victorious to eliminate them. The Taira persisted, in some form, in some places, under different names. The imperial succession. When the child emperor went into the sea at Dan-no-ura, Japan was left, technically, without an emperor. The Taira had taken him. The Taira were gone. He was gone with them. But the court in Kyoto had not been entirely still during the years of the Taira flight. Go-Shirakawa, always maneuvering, always finding the position that kept him viable, had arranged for another imperial succession. A different grandson, not Antoku, the Taira's child, but Go-Toba, another line, a child from a different branch, was enthroned. He was 4 years old when he became emperor. He reigned for the next decade as the formal emperor, while the real power moved increasingly toward Kamakura. The regalia were divided. The mirror had been recovered, floating on the water after the battle. The jewel had been captured from the Taira fleet. The sword was lost. An imperial institution without all three of its sacred treasures is a diminished institution, and the court knew this and managed it with the particular skill of an institution that has survived by managing inconvenient truths for 500 years. The regalia were reconstituted. The ceremonies continued. The emperor wore the robes. The offerings were made. Only the sword was absent, present in its absence, acknowledged in the ceremony that continued without it. The Biwa Hoshi, who sang the third part of the Heike, were singing the quietest section, the part that required a different quality of attention from the listener than the battles had required. The battles demanded the attention of the narrative, the forward movement, the next development, the outcome suspended between what has happened and what will happen. The third part demands something different. It asks the listener to be still, to sit with the woman in the mountain valley, and to let the years pass without the urgency of the battle's forward pull. This is harder. The narrative drive, the what happens next, that keeps the listener engaged, is quieted in the third part. What replaces it is something like the quality of the valley itself, the awareness that things are happening but slowly, in the rhythm of the seasons rather than the rhythm of armies, and that this slowness is not absence, but a different kind of presence. The Biwa monks who performed the third part in the temples and the households understood this. They slowed. The music of the third part the particular melodic patterns associated with the quiet sections, is different from the battle music, lower, more sustained, with longer intervals between the notes, more space for the silence to be part of the sound. The listener heard the change. The listener understood. The battle is over. The mountain is here. Be still. Jakko-in today. The temple in the valley of Ohara, the small temple where the Kenreimon-in lived and prayed and died, is still there. It is smaller than you might imagine. The hermitage of the last Heike is not a grand temple, not a major institution with multiple buildings and a large staff, but a modest temple tucked into the hillside, with the sound of water always audible and the cedars rising above the roof. The main hall burned in 2000, an act of arson, and was rebuilt. The Buddha that had been there, the one before which the Kenreimon-in had prayed, which had been present through centuries of prayer, was damaged. But the temple was rebuilt, as Japanese temples are rebuilt, with the understanding that what matters is the continuation, the maintenance of the form, the refusal to let what was built simply cease. You can visit it now. The stone steps up through the trees, the gate, the garden, the sound of the water, the autumn maples, the particular stillness of a place that has been a place of prayer for 800 years and carries in its air the quality of all that prayer, the accumulated attention of all the people who have come here and been still. The Kenreimon-in's grave is nearby, a small mound, a stone marker, in the hillside above the temple. She is there. She has been there for 800 years. The valley is the same. The maples still turn. Why does the Heike give the last word to the Kenreimon-in, not to the victors, not to Yoritomo, who built the new world, not to Go-Shirakawa, who survived everything, not even to the battles themselves, to Yoshitsune at the cliff, to the fan at Yashima, to the tide at Dano-ura, to the woman in the mountain valley? Because she saw everything. The Kenreimon-in was present at the height and at the fall, was at the court during the years of glory, and on the ships during the years of flight, and in the sea at the final moment, and survived to tell it. She is the only person in the entire story who was present for all of it. And because she is the person who understands what the Heike has been saying, who has the full, embodied knowledge of the thing the bell announced at the beginning. All things are impermanent. The powerful fall, the beautiful fades. What was held cannot be held. She does not know this as a theological proposition. She knows it as her life. The Heike gives her the last word because she has earned it, because the life she has lived gives her the authority to speak about impermanence in a way that no one else in the story can. Not from above it, not as a teaching, but from inside it, as someone who was at the center of the most complete demonstration of impermanence that the Japanese medieval world could produce. She was the Heike. She survived the Heike. She prayed for the Heike. She is the last word, because she is the most complete expression of what the story has been trying to say. Go-Shirakawa died in 1192. He had outlasted the war. He had outlasted Kiyomori. He had outlasted Yoshinaka. He had outlasted Yoshitsune. He had outlasted the Taira. He had not quite outlasted the Kamakura shogunate. Yoritomo was appointed shogun in the same year that Go-Shirakawa died. And The timing is the particular irony of Go-Shirakawa's long life. He survived everything only to see the final establishment of the thing he had spent decades trying to prevent. He was 65 years old. He had been at the center of Japanese politics for 40 years, from the Hogan Rebellion of 1156 to his death in 1192, through every major transformation of the period: the rise of the Taira, the fall of the Taira, the Genpei War, the establishment of Kamakura. He had managed and maneuvered through all of it, had been imprisoned by Kiyomori, and had outlasted Kiyomori, had been confined by Yoshinaka, and had outlasted Yoshinaka, had been constrained by Yoritomo, and had outlasted, almost, Yoritomo. His death did not change the direction of things. The shogunate continued, the court continued, the separation between the formal and the real continued. But something was gone with his passing, the particular quality of the survivor who had been present from the beginning, the thread of living memory that connected the world before the war to the world after it. He had been that thread. He had seen both worlds. When he died, the thread was cut. Ohara remembers the valley north of Kyoto, the valley of the autumn maples and the sound of water and the small temples tucked into the hillside, carries the memory of the Kenreimon-in in the specific way that places carry memory, not as a fact to be looked up, but as a quality of the place itself, a weight in the air, a particular attentiveness that the visitor feels without necessarily knowing why. The people of Ohara have been telling the story for 800 years. The women who sell the pickled vegetables, the shibazuki, the sour purple pickles that are one of Ohara's most famous products, have a tradition that the Kenreimon-in praised these pickles when the local farmers brought them to the hermitage. Whether this is true is impossible to know, but the connection is maintained. The story is told, because the community of Ohara has absorbed the story of the Kenreimon-in into its own story, has made her part of the place's identity. This is how memory works at its best, not as the museum exhibit, not as the informational sign, but as the living connection between the present community and the people who shaped the place they are living in. The farmers of Ohara still grow the vegetables. The pilgrims still walk the path to Jakko-in. The maples still turn in the autumn, and the story persists in the pickles, in the path, in the particular quality of the valley that holds its history the way a valley holds water, quietly, without announcement, as a simple fact of its form. The story and the song. The Heike is both. It is a story, a narrative of events, of specific people, and specific places, and specific things that happened. And it is a song, something that was sung, that was shaped by music, that carries in its language the quality of sound as much as the quality of meaning. The language of the Heike is unlike any other Japanese literary prose. It is the language of performance, of something designed to be heard rather than read, that was shaped by the voice and the Biwa over generations of telling. The sentences are built to be said aloud. The rhythms are the rhythms of speech, of breath, of the particular cadence of a human voice telling a story in a room to people who are listening. When you hear it in the original Japanese, even if you do not understand all the words, you understand something about it that the written page cannot fully convey. the music of the language, the rise and fall of the phrases, the particular weight of certain words that the tradition has given a specific musical emphasis, shogyomujo. All things are impermanent. 3 phrases, 3 musical peaks, the kind of cadence that the ear recognizes as something special, something that has been shaped by attention and repetition into the form that carries its meaning most fully. The story and the song are inseparable in the Heike. To read it is to hear it. To hear it is to understand why it has lasted 800 years, why the blind monks walked the roads and the audiences gathered, and the story was told again and again and again, each telling both the same story and a new story, the way the tide is always the same tide, and never exactly the same twice. The Kenreimon-in died at Jakko-in. The tale of the Heike does not give a precise date. The historical record is uncertain about when exactly she died, with various sources giving different years, but it describes the manner of her going with the particular beauty that the Heike reserves for the endings of people who have lived well within the constraints the world gave them. The tale says, one day a purple cloud appeared in the west, the direction of the Pure Land, the direction of Amida, Buddha, and a wonderful fragrance filled the air, and the sound of music was heard from the sky, and the Kenreimon-in, who had been holding the cord connected to the hand of the Buddha on the altar, passed. The language is the language of paradise, the specific, vivid imagery of the Pure Land tradition, describing the moment of death as the moment of arrival, the cloud in the west, the fragrance, the music, the signs that the Buddha has come to receive the person who has been calling on his name for years. Whether this is literally what happened, whether there was a cloud, whether there was fragrance, is the wrong question. The question is, what does the tradition understand about the death of a person who has prayed sincerely for years, who has held the cord, who has said the name? And the answer the tradition gives is expressed in the imagery. They were received. The compassion that was called on arrived. The gap was bridged. The Heike ends, not with a battle, not with a political settlement, not with the victory of one side or the defeat of the other, with a death in a mountain valley, quiet, attended, described in the language of arrival rather than departure, and the bell that has been ringing since the first line of the story, still ringing after the last line in the silence that follows. This is the form the Heike chose, not the hero's ending, not the death in battle, the standing death, the dramatic gesture of the warrior facing his fate, the nun's ending, the hermit's ending, the ending that is also a beginning, the passage from the world that the Buddhist tradition understands as the moment of arriving somewhere rather than leaving somewhere. The cord was in her hand, the name was on her lips, the west was where she was looking, and the cloud came in the understanding of the tradition, and she was received. The story is over. The bell is still ringing. Gion Shoja no Kane no Koe. The sound of the bell of Gion Shoja, Shogyomujo no Hibiki Ari, carries in it the sound of impermanence. All things pass. The Taira passed. The battles passed. The Kenreimon-in passed. The bell kept ringing. It is ringing now. 3 parts. The first part, the court. The second part, the battles. The third part, the quiet. The structure of the Heike is the structure of a life, of all lives, in the particular form that the Japanese Buddhist tradition recognized, the ascending, the crisis, the descent, the high point and the fall from it, the noise and the quiet after, the life in the world and the life beyond the world's claims. Kiyomori ascending, the battles falling, the Kenreimon-in and the mountain. The arc is clear. It is the arc. The opening lines announced. The arc that the bell's sound described. The arc that every listener who knew the Buddhist teaching recognized immediately. Impermanence. Not as a fact about the Taira, not as something special about this particular family, but as the structure of all things, expressed in the story of this family with unusual fullness and care. What the three parts together give. The first part gives the beauty, shows us what was lost at its best, so that the losing has its full weight. The second part gives the cost, shows us what the losing required, who paid it, and in what coin. The third part gives the resolution, not the happy ending, not the restoration, but the form of living that remains available after the worst has happened. The prayer, the mountain, the cord in the hand, the name on the lips, the West. The prayers for the dead. This is one of the things the Heike was always doing, not just telling the story of what happened, but performing the act of prayer for those who had died in the happening. The Biwa Hoshi who carried the Heike through the centuries were, as we have said, performing a memorial. Every performance was a prayer for the specific dead that the story named Atsumori, whose flute went with him to the sea, Tadanori, whose poem survived without his name, the child emperor, whose age the story records with the care we give to children who died too young, Tomomori, who saw everything and weighed himself to make sure, the grandmother, who held the child and turned west and stepped off into the receiving water. Named, remembered, prayed for. The Heike understood something that the modern world sometimes forgets, that naming the dead is not sentiment, it is necessity. The dead who are named are the dead who are held. The dead who are held are the dead who do not haunt. The dead who do not haunt are the dead who can rest. The Heike named them. The Biwa monks sang them. The audiences listened. 800 years of naming. 800 years of prayer. There is water at Ohara. The valley holds two rivers, the Retold and the Takanokami, that run through it from the mountains above, cold and clear, with the particular quality of mountain water that comes from a source above the world of fields and roads. The Kenreimon-in heard this water every day, not the sea that had received so much of what she loved, but the mountain water, the inland water, the water that knows nothing of tides and battles, and the strait between islands. The difference between these waters, the sea at Dan no Ura, deep, tidal, salt, moving with the enormous indifferent force of the ocean's breath, was the water of the ending. The stream at Ohara, shallow, clear, cold, moving with the specific modest energy of water that has somewhere to go but is in no hurry, was the water of the continuation. After the sea, the stream. After the overwhelming, the contained. After the ending, the sound of water that simply runs, that has always run and will run tomorrow in the same direction at the same temperature, with the particular reliability of things that do not participate in the dramas that happen beside them. She heard it every morning, the water running, the prayer beginning, the day continuing, one day at a time, the water always there, the prayer always there. The long aftermath. The Genpei War ended in 1185. The world that came after, the world that the third part of the Heike inhabits, was the world of the first shogunate, the world of the warrior governance that would define Japan for 7 centuries. What that world looked like, in the decades immediately after the war, was a world in transition, the old forms maintained, the new power consolidated, the people who had known the old world gradually dying and being replaced by people who had only known the new. The court continued, the ceremonies continued, the poetry continued, the seasonal observances, the cherry blossom viewing, the harvest moon watching, the plum blossom appreciation continued to organize the attention of the aristocracy that remained in Kyoto, but the money and the military were in Kamakura, and the people who had the money and the military were not the people who had composed the poems and maintained the ceremonies. The separation was not absolute. Warrior culture absorbed the aesthetic of the court and developed its own version of it, but it was real. The Heike stands at the hinge of this transition, looks back at the world that was passing and forward at the world that was coming, and its particular achievement is to honor both, to grieve the passing without condemning the change, to acknowledge the new world without forgetting what the old world was. The flower offering. When Go-Shirakawa arrived at Jakko-in and found the Kenreimon-in absent, when the attendant told him she had gone to pick flowers on the mountain, the detail is not incidental. The picking of wildflowers as an offering to the Buddha, the practice of going into the natural world and gathering what it provides as the gift to bring to the altar, is a practice rooted in the understanding that beauty is sacred, that the wildflower on the mountain is already an offering before it is picked, that the act of picking and placing on the altar is the act of completing a connection that already exists between the beautiful thing and the sacred. She was on the mountain gathering beauty when the retired emperor came to find her. This is the Heike's picture of her life in exile, not the defeated woman, not the grieving mother, not only these, but the woman who goes up the mountain in the morning to bring flowers to the altar. The beauty that she gathered was the beauty of Ohara, the wild flowers of the mountain path, the particular flowers of each season, plum in early spring, cherry and azalea, the summer wildflowers, the autumn cosmos, and chrysanthemum. She knew them all. She had spent years learning the names and the seasons of the flowers of the valley where she lived, had learned the mountain the way you can only learn a place by living in it for years, by walking the same paths in every season, by knowing where the first plum blooms and when. This is also a kind of knowledge, a kind of belonging. The nature of prayer. The Heike's third part is full of prayer. It is the dimension of the story that is most explicitly religious, and it is worth pausing to consider what the prayer in this context means. The Nembutsu, the recitation of Amida's name, is not petition in the way that Western prayer is sometimes understood as petition, the asking for specific things, the hoping for specific outcomes. It is more like an act of attention, the sustained, deliberate practice of directing awareness towards something larger than the individual self. And it is also an act of faith, the trust that the compassion that the name represents is real, that calling on it establishes a connection between the person calling and what they are calling on. For the Kenreimon-in, the prayer was also memory. She was praying for the people she had loved, the child, the family, the people who had died at Dan no Ura and in the battles before it. The prayer held their names in the attention she directed toward the Buddha, kept them present in the act of seeking on their behalf, maintained the connection between the living and the dead that the Buddhist tradition understands as the responsibility of the survivor. She survived, therefore she prayed, not as atonement, not because she had done something wrong in surviving, but because surviving gives the person the ability to do something the dead cannot do for themselves. Call on the compassion that receives them. The cedar trees, Sugi, the Japanese cedar, is the tree of the mountain temple, the tree of the sacred grove, the tree that was planted around shrines and temples from the earliest period of Japanese civilization. At Jakko-in, the cedars rise above the roof of the main hall, tall, straight, dark, the particular green-black of old cedar that is almost not a color, but a quality, the quality of something that has been growing for a very long time and has accumulated in its stillness a kind of presence. The cedars were there when the Kenreimon-in was there, not the same individual trees. 800 years is longer than any cedar's life, but the same trees in the sense that the same species, in the same location, performing the same function of marking the sacred, of making the boundary between the ordinary world and the world of the temple. She heard them in the wind, the sound the cedar makes, the particular sound of cedar branches moving in a mountain wind, is one of the sounds of the Japanese mountain forest, a high, dry sound, not the full-bodied rush of deciduous leaves, but the needle sound, the specific voice of the evergreen. She heard this every day. The wind in the cedars was part of the sound of the life she had, and the life she had was the life she prayed in, and the prayer rose through the cedar branches and the mountain air toward whatever receives prayer, the west, the pure land, the compassion that the name invokes. What was learned from the Heike? The question is not simple. The Heike does not have a single lesson, a moral that can be extracted and applied, but it has been teaching for 800 years, and the teaching has left traces in the culture. The warrior learned the cherry blossom death, the beauty of dying well, of dying at the height of what you were, is not something to be feared, but something to be aimed at. The beauty and the brevity are the same thing. The brief life well lived is the cherry blossom. The aristocrat learned refinement is not enough. The Heian world, the world of poetry and ceremony, was beautiful. It was also insufficient. The things that sustained it, the military protection, the economic base, were in the hands of people who were not aristocrats, and when those people decided to take what they had always provided, the aristocracy could not resist. Beauty needs something under it. The garden needs earth. The ordinary person learned, all things pass, not as a teaching to be studied, not as something delivered by a monk or a text, but as the story of a family that had everything and no longer did. If the Taira fell, with all their power, all their wealth, all their imperial connections, then no one is exempt. Everything is subject to the same condition. And in this, in the universality of the condition, there is something almost like comfort. Not comfort that it won't happen, but comfort that it happens to everything, that the bell rings for everyone, that the impermanence is shared. The moon comes to Ohara too, not only to the inland sea, not only to the battlefields, but to the mountain valley, to the small hermitage, to the garden where the wildflowers grew. The autumn moon over Ohara is one of the famous moons of the Kyoto area. The particular quality of moonlight in a mountain valley, free of the city's light, in the clear autumn air after the maples have turned, is something that people have walked to see for centuries. The Kenreimon-in saw it, the same moon that had risen over the Rokuhara in the years of the Taira's glory, the moon that Kiyomori might have seen from the garden of his compound, rose over Jakko-in in the years of the hermitage. The same moon, the same rising. It does not note the difference. It does not shine differently on the nun's garden than it shone on the nobleman's. It rises and moves and gives the same light to everything below it, to the cedar forest and the stream, and the small altar inside the hall, where the image of the Buddha waited for the morning prayer. The moon is the most patient of witnesses. It has seen everything that happened on the earth below, has provided the same light to all of it, and continues to rise and set and rise again. The Heike has been telling this story of impermanence under the same moon that was above the events it describes. The moon was there. It is still there. It will be there when the last person who reads the Heike is gone. The No Play. The visit of Go-Shirakawa to Ohara, the Ohara Goko, the imperial excursion to Ohara, became the subject of a no play, as so many moments in the Heike became no plays, as Atsumori became no, as Funa Benkei became no, as so many of the story's most significant encounters were given the form of the masked theater. The meeting at Jakko-in was made into the theater that is called Ohara Goko. In the no play, the Kenreimon-in is the shite, the main character, the person whose inner life the play illuminates, and the play moves through the encounter with the care that no gives to the inner dimension of its subjects. Not the external facts of what happened, those are known, but the quality of what it was to be the person to whom it happened. The no stage is small. The performer moves slowly. The mask carries the emotion of the role, the particular expression of the woman who has survived what she did not expect to survive and is living in the aftermath, and the audience looks at the mask and understands what the mask contains. This is what No does, what it has always done, with the material of the Heike, takes the historical moment and gives it the form of pure human experience, removes everything that is specific to the time and the place, and what remains is what was true then, and is true now, and will be true in whatever time the audience of No brings to the theater. There is something about the Heike that belongs to sleep, not only the third part, not only the quiet of the mountain valley, but the whole story, from the bell at the beginning to the death in the hermitage at the end. The Heike was told at night. The Biwa monks performed in the evening, in the long evenings before electricity, when the darkness came early and the household gathered around the lamp, and the storyteller who had arrived with the story on his back. The performance was the entertainment for the evening. It was also the last thing the listeners heard before they slept. The Heike prepared them for sleep by giving them something larger than themselves to hold. The bell, the impermanence, the family that rose and fell, the sea that received everything. With this in their ears, this reminder of what the world contains and what it does with all of it, the ordinary anxieties of the day could be placed in a different proportion. The person who lies awake, worrying about the things that can go wrong, is the person who has not yet arrived at the particular acceptance that the Heike teaches, that things go wrong, that the powerful fall, that the tide turns, and that this is not catastrophe, not the end of meaning, but the nature of things, which the bell has always announced, and the world has always confirmed. Sleep is the small impermanence. The self that wakes tomorrow is not exactly the self that falls asleep tonight. The Heike has been preparing people for this small crossing for 800 years. The women who survived. The Heike is, in some ways, a story of the women who were left behind, who outlasted the events that destroyed the men, and who found, in the aftermath, the forms of life available to them. The Kenreimon-in survived Dan no Ura. She went to Ohara. She prayed. The Shirabyoshi, who had been scattered by the fall of the Taira, Gio in her mountain hermitage, Hotoke, who had followed, had found their forms already. Shizuka Gozen, the dancer who sang for Yoshitsune, was brought to Kamakura, performed her brave song, and then disappeared from the record. What happened to her after Kamakura is not known. The women who were on the ships, the ladies-in-waiting who had followed the Taira into exile, some survived, some did not. The ones who survived scattered to wherever the world made available. The third part of the Heike honors these women not by telling their stories. There is not room, and many of their stories are not known, but by giving the Kenreimon-in the last word. The last word of the Heike belongs to a woman, not a warrior, not a general, not a political figure. A woman in a mountain hermitage, holding a cord, saying a name, praying for the dead. This is where the Heike chooses to end. This is what the Heike chose to give the last word to. The bell. It rings at the beginning. It rings at the end. Between the first sound of the bell and the last sound of the bell, the entire Heike occurs. The court, the battles, the sea, the mountain valley, the prayer, the cloud in the west. The bell of Gyon-shoja, the bell of the monastery of the Buddha in India, is not a real bell. There is no bell in Gyon-shoja that sounds like the bell the Heike invokes. It is the bell of the teaching, the bell that says, "Listen, something important is being said." The truth that the sounds are always sounding, that impermanence is not a special condition, but the ordinary nature of things, is being said again by this sound for anyone who has ears to hear it. The bells of Japan's temples are real. They are rung at dawn and at dusk, at the new year 108 times, one for each of the 108 attachments that the Buddhist teaching enumerates as the sources of suffering, and their sound carries through the air of the Japanese city or mountain or village with the specific resonance of iron struck by wood. Not a sharp sound, not a bright sound, a full, low, sustained sound that takes a long time to diminish. That seems to be still sounding when you have stopped hearing it, because the body holds it after the ears have let it go. This sound is what the Heike was always trying to make. A sound that carries the truth of impermanence into the body of the listener, that the listener feels as well as hears, that persists in the chest after the story has ended and the Biwa monk has gone on down the road. Listen for it. It is always sounding. The world after the Heike. The Kamakura period lasted until 1333, when it was overthrown in the conflicts that produced the Muromachi shogunate. The Muromachi shogunate lasted until the 16th century, until the chaos of the warring states, the Sengoku period, when the warlords fought each other for dominance, and the three great unifiers, Nobunaga, Hideyoshi, Ieyasu, imposed a new order on the competing forces. Tokugawa Ieyasu established the final shogunate at Edo, at what is now Tokyo, in 1603, and the Tokugawa period lasted until 1868, when the Meiji Restoration ended the shogunate and restored formal power to the emperor. Through all of this, the Kamakura, and the Muromachi, and the chaos of the Sengoku, and the stability of the Tokugawa, the Heike was being told. The Biwa monks walked the roads. The no plays were performed. The chapters were taught in schools. The opening lines were memorized. The cherry blossoms were watched, and the poems were composed in the knowledge that the Heike had been watching and composing since before any of the poets were born. The Heike outlasted every political arrangement that came after it. The shogunates rose and fell. The warlords came and went. The emperors reigned and the shoguns governed, and the country changed and changed again. And the bell kept ringing, and the story kept being told. Jion, Shoja, no Kane, no Koe, Shogyo Mujo, no Hibiki Ari. The Heike in the modern world. The opening lines are memorized by every Japanese schoolchild. The battles are depicted in manga and anime and films and television dramas and video games, Yoshitsune and Benkei as familiar as any heroes of the contemporary culture. The no plays are still performed, a living tradition maintained by a small number of devoted performers, and the Biwa is still played by musicians who have studied the tradition and carry it forward. In 2021, an animated television series, Heike Monogatari, was released, directed by Yamada Naoko, produced by Science Saru, that told the story from the perspective of a girl who could see the dead, who served the Taira as a witness to their fall. It was beautiful. It reached audiences who had never read the Heike, people around the world who discovered through the animation a story that had been told in Japan for 800 years. This is what great stories do. They find new forms, biwa, no, print, anime, because the story does not belong to any single form. The form is the vessel. The story is the water. The water takes the shape of whatever contains it, and is still the same water. The Heike changes form. It remains the Heike. The bell keeps ringing. The fans keep falling. The tide keeps turning. And the woman in the mountain valley keeps praying for the dead. The mountain in winter. Ohara in winter is a different valley from Ohara in autumn. The maples bare, the color gone, the hills revealing their structure without the leaves, the bones of the landscape visible under the sky. Snow comes to Ohara, not every year. Kyoto is not a snowy city. But the valley is cold enough, and the hills catch enough of what comes down from the mountains further north, that the winters at Jakko-in were genuinely cold. The Kenreimon-in had lived in silk. She learned to live in cold. The unheated hermitage, the stone floors, the wooden walls that let the mountain air through, required a different relationship with the body's comfort than the court had allowed. This too was practice. The cold that the monk accepts as part of the practice, not as punishment, not as virtue, but simply as the condition of the life, to be met with the same equanimity as the warmth of summer, hot and cold, beautiful and plain, full and empty. The practice asks, can you be here in what is here without requiring it to be different? She prayed in the cold, the breath making small clouds in the hermitage air, the image of the Buddha above the cold altar, the cord in her cold hand, the name on her lips, Namu Amida Butsu. The cold does not prevent the prayer. The prayer warms nothing. Both things are true, and the prayer continues. The cord in the hand, the 5 colored cords, red, blue, yellow, white, black, that connected the hands of the dying person to the hand of Amida on the altar. This is the specific practice that the Pure Land tradition developed for the moment of death, the physical connection between the person who was about to cross and the Buddha who would receive them. But the Kenreimon-in's practice was not the deathbed practice. It was the daily practice, the ongoing holding of the cord, as the ongoing act of connection, the maintenance of the link between the person praying and the compassion being prayed to, not waiting for death, living toward it, in the full sense of the word toward, moving in a direction, with the cord in the hand, with the name on the lips. The cord is a remarkable object, so simple, silk thread, 5 colors, connecting a hand to an image, and yet what it enacts, what it makes physical, is one of the deepest of all human needs, the need to be connected to something larger than oneself, to be held by something that will not let go, to have in the hand the thread that leads to where you need to go. She held the cord, day after day, year after year, in the cold of winter and the heat of summer, in the grief and in the particular peace that exists on the other side of grief, when grief has been fully lived through. She held the cord. The cord held her. She was the last, not the last survivor. Others survived, scattered to various forms of diminished life, but the last person at the level of the highest court, the last person who had been at the very center of what the Heike was, who was still alive in the years after. This gives her a particular quality, the quality of the last witness, the person whose existence maintains the connection between the world that was and the world that has come after. While she lived, the Heike was still present, not as a story, but as a person. There was a person alive who had been there, who had seen Kiyomori in the years of his power, who had been the Empress Mother in the years of the Taira's height, who had been on the ships, who had been at Dan no Ura, alive, in Ohara, praying. When she died, whenever that was, the last living connection between the Heike's world and the world that came after was severed. From that moment, everything that the Heike describes became truly history, truly past, truly something that had to be maintained through story, rather than through the person who had been there. The Biwa monks understood this. They were singing the story of a world that was already fully past, that existed now only in the singing, and in the singing they kept it present. Story as preservation, song as life, the Biwa as the cord, connecting the past to the ears of the living. Acceptance, the word that the Buddhist tradition uses for what the Kenreimon-in arrived at, not the word it uses, which is more specific and more technical, but the word that the experience points toward, the acceptance of what is, not resignation, not the passive submission to whatever happens, but the active recognition that what has happened, that the sea received what it received, and the prayer honors what is gone, and the life continues in whatever form remains. She did not pretend that the child was not dead. She did not pretend that the family was not gone. She did not pretend that the court she had been the center of still existed as it had existed. She held all of this, the full weight of the loss, and she prayed. This is the specific achievement of the third part of the Heike, not the comfort that it will be all right, not the promise of the happy ending, but the demonstration that a person can hold the full weight of loss and continue, can pray, can pick flowers on the mountain, can hear the water and the wind, can hold the cord, can say the name, can, in the words of the tradition, attain to the Pure Land, can arrive somewhere after everything, because the faith that the compassion exists and receives is what the practice builds, one day at a time, in the mountain valley, in the cold and the warmth alike. The sound of the valley. Sound was the constant of the life at Jakko-in, not silence exactly, but the particular sound world of a mountain valley that is the closest thing to silence that the Japanese landscape provides. The water. Always the water, the rivers running through the valley, the smaller streams coming off the hillsides, the particular quality of mountain water in each season, high and cold in the snowmelt of spring, lower and warmer in summer, darkened by the leaf tannins of autumn, thin and cold again in winter. The birds, the valley birds of the mountain forest, the uguisu, the Japanese bush warbler, whose call is one of the most distinctive sounds of the Japanese spring, and the other birds of the mountain, each with its own season and its own voice. The wind, in the cedar forest, as we have said, the particular dry sound of the needle trees moving, and in the deciduous trees, when they have their leaves, the fuller sound of the broader surface moving in the mountain air. These sounds compose the oral world of the Kenreimon-in's years, not the drums of the battle, not the cries of the sea, not the music of the court, the koto and the flute and the poetry recited at the moon viewing, the water, the birds, the wind, and underneath all of it, woven into it, the sound of the prayer, Namu Amida Butsu, said quietly, into the valley air, received by whatever receives prayers in the mountain valleys of Japan. The Heike as mirror. One of the things that makes the Heike worth returning to, worth the attention it has been given for 8 centuries, is that it shows the people who read it, or hear it, something about themselves. Not because the 12th century is like the 21st. It is not. The specific world of the Heike, the court, the armor, the Biwa, the inland sea, is as far from the modern world as anything can be while remaining human. But the human is what remains. The person who grasps too hard and cannot stop grasping, kiyomori. The person who sees clearly what grasping costs, and cannot convince the one who needs convincing, shigemori. The person who is brilliant at the thing they are brilliant at, and suffers for what their brilliance makes them, yoshitsune. The person who survives through intelligence and flexibility, and finds, at the end, the survivor's particular solitude, Go-Shirakawa. The person who holds the cord, and says the name, and prays for the dead, and lives in the mountain valley with what remains, the Kenreimon-in. These are not ancient types. They are recognizable. The reader who has known someone who could not stop, who has been that person in some form, knows kiyomori. The reader who has seen clearly what was coming and could not stop it knows Shigemori. The reader who has done everything right and been punished for it knows Yoshitsune. The reader who has survived and wondered what to do with the surviving knows the Kenreimon-in. The Heike is a mirror, 800 years old, still accurate. The maple season at Ohara, Koyo, the autumn leaves, is one of the great events of the Japanese aesthetic year. In late October and November, the timing varying by elevation and by year, the maple trees of the Japanese mountains turn from green to red, through orange, through the particular yellow of the dying leaf, before it achieves the red of its fullest expression. Ohara is famous for this. The valley holds the cold air that the maples need, the cold nights alongside the warm days, to produce the best color and the particular composition of the valley, the cedars providing the dark green background against which the red maples appear most vivid, makes the autumn color at Ohara something that people travel for. The Kenreimon-in saw this every year, year after year, the maples turning, the leaves falling, the valley changing from the green of summer to the fire of autumn to the bare bones of winter. She had seen the cherry blossoms fall at the Heian court, had experienced the aesthetic of the falling in the world of poetry and ceremony. Now she saw the same falling in a different context, not as the subject of poetry to be composed and shared with people who understood the references, but as the simple fact of the season, the actual leaves falling in the actual valley of the life she was living. The maples do not care who is watching. They turn for the cold. They fall for the wind. But the person watching, the person in the valley who has learned to see the simple falling without needing to do anything with it except see it, that person receives something from the watching that the poem cannot quite capture, the direct experience of impermanence as the actual world doing what it does. The Heike is a Buddhist text, not purely, it is also a military chronicle, a work of literature, a performance tradition, a historical account, and a poetic achievement. But it is Buddhist in the way that the air of the Heian period was Buddhist, not as a special condition requiring announcement, but as the atmosphere in which everything occurred, the framework within which the events were understood. The Buddhist concepts that pervade the Heike, Mujo, impermanence, Go, karma, the Rakudo, the six realms, the Pure Land, and the Nembutsu, were not abstract teachings for the people who heard it. They were the framework of reality. The world the Heike describes understood itself through Buddhist terms, explained what happened to itself in Buddhist language, and the Heike carries that understanding in every passage. When Kiyomori falls ill and dies in the heat that no water can cool, the Heike is describing karma, the consequences of actions returning to the person who made them. When the Kenreimon-in maps her life onto the six realms, she is not using a metaphor. She is using the actual map, the actual understanding of how existence is organized that her tradition gave her. When the cloud appears in the west and the fragrance fills the air, the Heike is describing what the Pure Land tradition says actually happens at the death of the practitioner, the arrival of the Buddha who has been called. The Buddhism of the Heike is not the Buddhism of the meditation hall, not the rigorous practice of the Zen tradition that was developing in the same period. but the Buddhism of the people, the faith that compassion exists, that it can be called upon, that the name said sincerely opens the way. What the third part gives that the first two parts could not. The first part gave the beauty, the height of what was built, the quality of what existed, and the sense that it could not last. The second part gave the cost, the battles, the deaths, the specific people, and specific moments in which the cost was paid. The third part gives the form of living after, not the triumphant living after, not the victorious survivor claiming the fruits of survival, but the quiet living after, the person in the mountain valley who woke each morning and did not know how many mornings remained, and prayed through each one with the same attention and the same cord in the hand. This is what the Heike was always moving toward. The opening lines announced impermanence. The court demonstrated it. The battles enacted it. The sea received it. And then, the mountain valley, the prayer, the cord, the form of life that is possible after impermanence has been fully understood. Not as a teaching, not as a philosophical proposition, but as your actual life, as the thing that happened to you, as the world you woke up in every morning after everything was gone. The third part says, there is a form of living that is available in the aftermath. It is quiet. It is not triumphant. It is not recovered to what was before, but it is real, and it is livable. And the person who lives it with full attention, who holds the cord, says the name, picks the flowers, watches the maples, that person is not diminished by what they have been through. They are deepened by it. The bell in the modern world. The temples of Japan still ring their bells. At dawn and at dusk, at the great ceremonies, at the turn of the year, the sound that the Heike placed at the center of its teaching is still being made, in the same way, by the same kind of bells, rung by the same kind of people, who have taken on the responsibility of maintaining the practice. The most famous bell ringing in Japan today is the Joya no Kane, the bell ringing of New Year's Eve, 108 times, one for each of the bonds that, the Buddhist teaching says, bind the human being to suffering. The bell is rung at each temple across Japan, and the sound crosses the night from one temple to the next, from one community to the next, until the whole country has heard it. People gather at the temples. They stand in the cold of the Japanese winter. December 31st is cold everywhere in Japan, and they listen. Not all of them know the Buddhist meaning. Not all of them could explain the 108, but they know that the bell is something important, that its sound in the cold air of the last night of the year is doing something that needs to be done, that the sound of it is the sound of the year ending and the new year beginning and the continuation that connects them. The Heike heard this sound and put it at the beginning. All things are impermanent. 800 years later, the bell is still ringing, in the cold of December, in the temple courtyards, in the ears of the people who have gathered to hear it once more. The complete arc, 3 parts, 3 movements, 1 story. From the bell at the beginning, the bell over the Heian court at its height, the bell that said, "This is beautiful and it is passing," through the battles that were the passing, the armies and the sea and the specific people and specific moments in which the Taira's world was dismantled, to the mountain valley at the end, the hermitage, the prayer, the cord in the hand, the name on the lips, and then the cloud in the west, the fragrance, the sound of music from the empty air, and the bell that was ringing at the beginning, still ringing at the end, as it was ringing before the story began, and will be ringing after the telling is finished. This is the Heike's form, the arc that begins and ends with the same sound, that contains within it the full range of what the human world offers and takes back, and that arrives at its conclusion, not at resolution, but at continuation, the bell ringing, the tide running, the maples turning, the woman in the mountain valley picking flowers for the altar, the prayer said, the cord held, the name spoken, and the world going on, as the world goes on, without asking permission, without waiting for anyone to be ready. The bell is ringing. Listen. The mountain sleeps differently from the city. In the city, in Kyoto, in Kamakura, in any city, the night is never entirely quiet. The sounds of people, of animals, of water in the drainage, of fire in the houses. The nighttime city has its own sound, lower than the daytime city, but present, the aggregate of all the lives that the city contains. The mountain valley is quieter. At Ohara, in the years the Kenreimon-in was there, before electricity, before the infrastructure of the modern world, the night was genuinely dark and genuinely quiet. The water, the wind, the particular nighttime sounds of the mountain forest, the owl, the insects of summer, the silence of winter. She slept in this quiet, or lay awake in it. The sleepless nights that grief produces, when the mind will not relinquish what it has been holding long enough for the body to rest. And then the prayer in the wakeful dark, the name said not as a formal practice, but as the thing the person does when there is nothing else to do, when the mind has been through everything it knows how to go through and arrived at the limit of its own resources, and found, in the saying of the name, something that the mind alone cannot provide. The mountain is quiet. The prayer is quiet. The sleep, when it comes into the quiet, into the valley held by the hills, the water running below, the stars above moving through their slow arc, the particular rest that the mountain gives to those who live in it long enough to belong to it. The trilogy complete. We have traveled the full arc, from the bell at the beginning to the bell at the end, through the three parts of the story that Japan has told itself for 800 years. What we have been told, that beauty is real, that it passes, that the passing is not the end of meaning, that the beauty was real even though it passed, and that the passing is itself a form of beauty if seen clearly enough. That courage is real, the courage of Yoshitsune at the cliff, the courage of Benkei at the gate, the courage of Tomomori sweeping the ship. And that courage is available in forms that do not require a battlefield. The courage of the Kenreimon in picking flowers in the morning for the altar, saying the name, holding the cord, living the life that remained. That loyalty is real. The loyalty of Benkei to Yoshitsune, the loyalty of the attendants to the Kenreimon-in, and that loyalty does not require a dramatic ending to be genuine. The loyalty that shows up every ordinary day is the same loyalty as the standing death, expressed in a quieter key. That impermanence is real, that the bell is telling the truth, and that knowing this fully and without denial is not a cause for despair, but a cause for attention. the attention we give to what is here, because we know it will not always be here, the particular fullness of the presence that the awareness of impermanence makes possible. The night at Ohara. Picture it, the valley in darkness, the mountains on either side holding the darkness in, making the valley a contained world, bounded by hills, enclosed in the particular quiet of the mountain night. The temple at Jakko-in, its gate visible in the moonlight, its roof a darker shape against the darker sky, is quiet. The lamp inside the hall is lit, or was lit, for the evening prayer, and now the evening prayer is done, and the lamp is low, and the hall is quiet. The Kenreimon-in sleeps, or she is awake, in the particular way of the person who has prayed a great deal, and whose sleep is a continuation of the practice rather than a break from it, the name still present in the sleeping mind, the cord somewhere near even in the dark. The water runs, the cedars are still, the stars are out, the same stars that were above the inland sea at Dan-no-ura, the same stars that were above Hirizumi when Yoshitsune died, the same stars that were above the Rokuhara in the years of the Taira's height, the same stars, a different night, the same sky, a different world beneath it, and in the mountain valley, a woman, a prayer, a cord, the name, and the night continuing around her. The Heike and time. 800 years is a long time for a story to last. Most stories do not last 800 years. Most things do not last 800 years. The fact of the Heike's persistence, its 8 centuries of telling, is itself a demonstration of the thing it has been saying, that what is truly made of the human encounter with truth does not pass the way the powerful pass, does not fall the way the Taira fell. The Taira fell. The Heike about the Taira did not fall. Kiyomori is gone. The story of Kiyomori is here. The Kenreimon-in is gone. The story of the Kenreimon-in, the woman in the mountain valley holding the cord, is here. This is what storytelling does, what the Biwa monks understood that they were doing when they walked the roads with the story on their backs. They were making the dead present among the living, not in the way that haunting makes the dead present, not as the unquiet spirit returning to what it left, but in the way that memory at its most purposeful makes the dead present, as the specific truth of their specific lives, given a form that allows it to survive them, that allows it to travel from one era to the next, that allows us, 800 years later, to know what it was like to be Yoshitsune on the cliff, to be the grandmother holding the child, to be the woman in the valley saying the name. We know, because the Heike tells us, because the Biwa monks walked, because the tradition held. 800 years, still here, still true. Rest. The Heike has been preparing you for rest throughout its 3 parts, not by making you sleepy, not by boring you into unconsciousness, but by doing what the best stories do, by placing your attention in a world large enough to hold it completely, to give it somewhere to rest outside of the ordinary circle of the day's concerns. The concerns of the day, the things that loop in the mind when sleep is slow in coming, are real concerns. They are not nothing, but they are also small in the context of the Heike's world, not in a way that dismisses them, not in a way that says, your problems are trivial, but in a way that says, here is a larger world, a world that contains kingdoms rising and falling, seas receiving everything they receive, women in mountain valleys praying for the dead, and within this larger world, your specific concerns are held without being solved, are given a context that is not a solution, but is something that a solution cannot give: perspective. The bell rings. All things are impermanent. Your concern is real. Your concern is also impermanent. It will pass, as everything passes, in the direction that everything passes. And in knowing this, in holding this, the body finds the particular permission to let go for now, to release the grip, to follow the sound of the bell as it diminishes into silence, to let the silence be the silence of sleep, the small crossing, the small impermanence, and to trust that the other side of sleep will bring what it brings. The final night. Not the Kenreimon-in's final night. That is the night of the cloud and the fragrance and the sound of music. But the night of this telling, the night that the third part of the Heike has been carrying you through. You have heard the bell at the beginning, the court in its beauty, Kiyomori rising, Gio in the mountain, Shigemori kneeling, the child emperor on his throne, the armies moving, the cliff at Hyodori-go, the fan at Yashima, the tide at Dan-no-ura, the grandmother stepping off the ship, the mountain valley, the cord in the hand, the name on the lips, the cloud in the west. The story is complete. 3 parts, 1 arc, 800 years of telling. And now, this night, wherever you are, in the particular darkness of your own moment, the story has arrived at the silence that follows the telling. Let the silence be complete. Let the bell finish its ringing in whatever part of you it has been ringing. Let the sound diminish the way the bell's sound diminishes, slowly, fully, until what remains is not the sound, but the memory of the sound. And then, not even that, just the quiet. The Heike is quiet now. The mountain valley is quiet. The cord is held. The name has been said. Let yourself be quiet too. The landscape of the third part. If the first part belongs to Kyoto, to the Rokuhara and the Kamo River and the cherry blossoms of the court, and the second part belongs to the sea, to the inland sea and the strait of Dan-no-ura, then the third part belongs to the mountains. The mountains north of Kyoto, the range that separates the city from the Japan sea coast, that rises behind the northern edge of the capital and runs north and east into the ranges of central Honshu, is the direction in which the third part points. Ohara is in the first folds of these mountains, not deep in the range, not remote, but far enough to be a different world from the city below. The landscape of the third part is a landscape of enclosure, not the enclosure of the fortress, not the walls of Ichi-no-Tani, but the gentle enclosure of the valley, the hills on either side creating the particular sense of being held, of being in a space that has a shape and a size that a person can inhabit without being lost. The Kenreimon-in moved from the vastness of the sea, the horizon in every direction, the water without boundary, to the containment of the valley. Both are beautiful, both are true, but the valley was what she needed, the smaller world, the bounded world, the world where the sound of the water told her where she was, and the hills told her how far was far enough. She stayed within the valley held her, both of them, faithful to each other. The story continues. Not this story, the Heike ends, but the larger story, the one the Heike is a part of, the story of the human being encountering the world, and trying to understand it, trying to find the form that holds the understanding, and finding again and again that the form that holds it best is the story itself. Every culture has its Heike, its great account of the time when everything changed, of the family or the civilization that rose and fell, and every such account carries in it the same knowledge, that all things pass, that the beautiful fades, that the powerful fall, that the bell is ringing. The Heike is Japan's version, the specific, beautiful, musically sophisticated, carefully told version of the story that all cultures tell about the impermanence of everything they have built. And it tells it with unusual honesty, without the consolation of the hero's triumph, without the restoration of the old order, without the happy ending, but with the consolation that the tradition provides: the bell, the prayer, the chord, the cloud in the west, the sense that the compassion exists, that it receives what the world has taken, that nothing that has been fully loved is entirely lost. The third part ends, the Heike ends. The trilogy of the Tale of the Heike, the three parts that have carried you from the court in its flowering through the battles and the sea to the mountain valley and the prayer, has arrived at its conclusion. What you have heard is one of the great stories of the world, one of the handful of works that a civilization has made of itself at its fullest, the story that Japan made of the moment when everything it had been became something else. You have heard it in the particular way that it was always meant to be heard, at night, in the quiet, with the story carrying you toward the sleep that the story was made to precede. Let it carry you there now. Let the bell finish its ringing. Let the Kenreimon-in hold the chord in the mountain valley. Let the tide run through the strait. Let the maples turn in Ohara. Let the stars continue their arc above the sleeping world. Let the story be what it is, complete, beautiful, impermanent, and true. The story has been told. The night is here. The quiet is available. Step into it. What has been given? Through three parts, through the court and the battles and the mountain valley, the Heike has given something that is difficult to name, but easy to recognize. Not information. The facts of the Heike are available in books, in the original text, in the scholarship that has been devoted to it for 8 centuries. Not instruction. The Heike does not tell you what to do, does not offer a program for living, does not say, do this and you will be better. What the Heike gives is something more like company, the particular company of a great story, the sense that you are not alone in the human situation, that the condition you are in, the condition of being human, of loving things that pass, of building things that fall, of surviving things you did not expect to survive, is a condition that others have been in, that has been witnessed, that has been given the form of words and music, and told to anyone who would listen. You are not alone in the bell that rings for you. The particular impermanence of your particular life is the bell that rang for the Taira, for the child emperor, for the grandmother, for the woman in the valley. The same bell, the same sound, the same truth. And in knowing this, in hearing, through the story, that others heard the bell and found a way to live in its ringing, there is something available. Not comfort, exactly, not solution, but company. And company is not nothing. In the long human night, company is not nothing. The Heike is in your ears now, the story that has been told, the 3 parts, the arc from bell to bell, has entered the particular space that stories enter when they have been fully told, not only the mind, not only the understanding, but something deeper, something that the Japanese would call mono no aware, the pathos of things, the feeling awareness of the beauty that passes and the passing that is beautiful. You have been in the court. You have felt the quality of the world at its height, the cherry blossoms in the garden, the ceremony at dusk, the particular refinement of people who had spent generations paying attention to beauty. You have been in the battle. You have felt the speed of it, the descent at the impossible cliff, the arrow finding the fan, the tide that turned and took everything with it. You have been in the valley. You have felt the quiet of it, the water, the wind, the cedar, the cord in the hand, the name on the lips. These things are in your ears. They will be there when you wake tomorrow, not as information, not as the facts of the 12th century, but as the quality of the experience, the sense of having been in a world larger than the day, of having heard the bell that rings for everything and understood for a moment what it is ringing. The valley in the morning, before dawn, in the particular dark that precedes the light, and is not the dark of midnight, but the dark of arrival, of something about to happen. The valley of Ohara holds its breath. The water is still running. The water does not stop for the dark. It runs in the dark, as it runs in the light, with the same direction, the same temperature, the same sound, indifferent to whether anyone is awake to hear it. The birds are not yet singing. The uguisu, the bush warbler, whose call is the sound of spring, sleeps until the light tells it to begin. The robins are quiet. The mountain is quiet. And then, the first gray light at the edge of the hills, not the sun, not yet, but the light that comes before the sun, the announcement of the sun, the particular quality of gray that the sky takes on when the darkness has finished its business and is ready to yield. The Kenreimon-in woke before this light. The morning prayer began in the dark and continued into the gray and into the first light and into the full morning. The prayer that started the day, that set the direction, that said, "This day is given to the practice. This day is given to the name. This day is given to the memory of those who are gone and to the compassion that receives them." The valley grayed. The light came. The birds began. The morning arrived as mornings always arrive, without asking permission, without checking whether the person who would experience it was ready, and it was received as she received everything, with the name on her lips and the cord in her hand, and the attention that the practice builds, one morning at a time. The bell rings one last time. Not the final ringing, there is no final ringing, but the ringing that closes this telling. The sound that has been present through all 3 parts, that opened the story and closes it, that the first listeners heard and that you have heard, in its diminished form, in the form of words rather than iron and wood, through these nights. Gion shoja no kain no koe, shogyo mujo no hibiki ari. The sound of the bell of Gion shoja carries in it the sound of impermanence. Shara soju no hana no iro, josha hisui no kotowari wo arawasu. The color of the sala flowers reveals the truth that the prosperous must decline. These words, 800 years old, still the most recognized literary opening in the Japanese language, carry in them everything that has been said in the 3 parts. the beauty, the fall, the prayer, the cloud in the west, all of it in 8 lines, all of it in the sound of the bell. Listen for the bell in your own life, the bell that rings when something passes, when something beautiful fades, when the tide turns in a direction you did not choose. It is ringing. It is always ringing. And what it says, what it has always said, is not a warning, but an invitation. Be here. This is passing. Be here while it passes. That is enough. That is everything. Final words. The tale of the Heike, in all 3 of its parts, in all of its beauty and grief and courage, ends as it began, with a person in the presence of something larger than themselves, receiving what the world has to give, attending to the passing with full presence. At the beginning, the court at its height, the beauty of a world that knew somehow that it was passing, and found in the knowing a beauty specific to itself. At the end, the woman in the mountain valley, the cord in the hand, the name on the lips, and the cloud in the west that the tradition understands as arrival. Between beginning and end, everything. The specific people and the specific places, Kiyomori and Shigemori, Jio and Hotoki, Yoshitsune and Benkei, Atsumori and his flute, Tomomori sweeping the ship, Nasu no Yoichi and the fan, the grandmother and the child, the sword in the straight. All of it specific, all of it real, all of it past, and preserved in the telling. The Heike is the telling. The telling is what remains when everything else has been received by the sea and the earth and the silence that follows all things. The story remains. The song remains. The bell remains. And in each new telling, in each new night when the story is told to ears that have not heard it, the past becomes present. The dead are among the living, and the bell sounds in the space between them. This is what we have been doing. This night. This telling. This bell. The Heike has been told. The night is here. The quiet is here. The bell is ringing, diminishing, into the silence that receives it. Go there. Rest well. Sleep well. The bell keeps ringing while you sleep. Good night. New Japanese stories every day on Quiet Tales of Japan. See you again for your next sleep.